On March 7th, workers at the Amara shoe factory in Nam Định province, Vietnam, staged a large-scale strike. The factory, which employs 11,000 workers, is owned by Zhongshan Huali Industrial Group, a Guangdong-based company from China. The striking workers demanded wage increases for employees with over 5 years of service, higher meal subsidies, factory-provided meals for those working overtime until 7:30 p.m., and an additional 30-minute break. One worker expressed frustration, saying, "We've been working here for years, yet our wages haven't increased. We used to receive meal allowances for overtime, but now the company has cut them entirely. When we work here extra hours, all we get is a sandwich with no real break or time to eat." Due to the factory's size and the large number of workers involved, local authorities and the Ministry of Labor, as well as the police, arrived at the scene to mediate the dispute. Negotiations are currently underway between the company representatives, labor unions, and workers to find a resolution. The Amara factory strike followed another major labor action just days earlier. On the morning of March 3rd, over 2,000 workers at Adiana Footwear in Thọ District, Thanh Hóa Province, walked off the job, demanding an increase in their monthly wages from 4.3 million to 5 million Vietnam dong, around $169 to $196. Following mediation by local labor union representatives, Adiana management agreed to the wage increase and all workers returned to their jobs by the afternoon. Similarly, on March the 1st, nearly 2,500 workers at Roll Sport, another footwear factory in Thanh Hóa Province, New Thanh District, staged a strike over low wages, arguing that their current pay was below local standards. After negotiations with labor unions, Roll Sport agreed to raise wages, prompting workers to resume production. Reports indicate that all three factories, Amara, Adiana, and Roll Sport, were subsidiaries of Zhongshan Huali Industrial Group Company Limited, a Taiwanese-owned enterprise headquartered in Zhongshan, Guangdong, China. As the world's second-largest sports shoe manufacturer, Huali Group operates over 20 production-related factories, including those producing finished shoes, shoe materials, and molds. While its management headquarters and R&D center are based in Zhongshan, its primary production facilities are located in Vietnam, with additional factories in Indonesia, the Dominican Republic, and Myanmar. The company primarily manufactures footwear for international brands such as Nike, VF, Deckers, Puma, and Columbia, with most of its products destined for North American and European markets. Many Chinese social media users praised Vietnamese workers for standing up for their rights, arguing that fair treatment is achieved through collective action rather than employer generosity. They left comments like, "Vietnamese workers are united and understand how to use the law to protect themselves. I worked in a factory in Vietnam for several years, and their organizing power is strong. If wages aren't paid by the 15th of the month, not a single worker will enter the workshop. I support Vietnam. Back in Guangzhou's handbag factories 20 years ago, bosses forced workers to do overnight shifts, sometimes for 24 hours straight, and delayed wage payments for months at a time." Others lamented the situation in China, contrasting the effectiveness of Vietnamese labor unions with their Chinese counterparts. Some netizens remarked that Vietnam is a country with hope, while Chinese labor unions serve as mere formalities without advocating for workers' rights. In China, workers are the only ones in the world who tirelessly work long hours without demanding fair pay. That's why we've developed so quickly. Try finding another country where working 12 hours a day is considered normal. Another comment questions the role of Chinese labor unions, with one user bluntly stating, "I don't even know what China's labor unions do." Since early March, multiple large-scale strikes have erupted across Vietnam, with many occurring at Chinese-owned enterprises. According to Vietnamese media reports, between March the 1st and March 7th alone, at least 10 companies experienced strikes involving over 25,000 workers. The main demands have been higher wages and better rest periods, and in most cases, the disputes were resolved through negotiations facilitated by local labor unions and government agencies. For example, in January, a Chinese-owned garment factory in Vietnam's northern Dong Nai province faced a mass strike after unilaterally extending employees' working hours. The factory had changed the work schedule from 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. to 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., adding an extra 30 minutes to the workday. The move triggered strong opposition from the labor union, ultimately leading 1,500 employees to go on strike. Management was forced to compromise and reinstate the original work schedule. The wave of labor actions has sparked heated discussions online, with social media users questioning why these companies enforce grueling 12-hour shifts and 2-shift rotations without guaranteed weekends in China, yet adopt an 8-hour, 5-day work week with mandatory rest days when operating overseas. It's the same company, yet workers in China have to work over 10 hours a day, while those in Vietnam only work 8. Recently, a large-scale strike broke out in Vietnam because a Chinese company tried to impose its 996 work culture on a Vietnamese factory. They extended working hours without permission and even cut meal breaks by 30 minutes. Well, that didn't sit well with the workers. They weren't having it. In response, 1,500 of them went on strike and took the company straight to the labor union. Vietnam's labor union stepped in immediately, saying the new arrangement was unacceptable. The company tried to argue, "We're a multinational corporation. Policies aren't always the same everywhere. This is just how we operate in China too." But the Vietnamese labor union stood its ground. In the end, under pressure, the company had no choice but to restore the original working hours. Some Chinese business owners in Vietnam are now considering, why do Vietnamese workers have so much confidence when standing up for themselves? Chinese business owners say it's largely because of Vietnam's strong labor unions, which are legally recognized and actually fight for workers' rights. What do you think? Strikes have been breaking out across Vietnam, and in most cases, workers' demands have been met. This has left many Chinese workers feeling bitter. One person commented, 12-hour shifts are nothing for us, while Vietnamese workers dare to strike for an 8-hour day and a 5 million dong salary. It's frustrating to compare. Another quipped, bosses who are used to exploiting workers shouldn't go to Vietnam. They'll just embarrass themselves. Workers there won't put up with that nonsense. This is why many Chinese companies moving their assembly lines to Vietnam have found themselves struggling. They assume they could treat workers there the same way they do in China, only to realize that in so-called backward Vietnam, workers refuse to be tamed and are quick to protest. Take BYD, China's leading EV manufacturer, which has been aggressively expanding into Vietnam in recent years. The company has invested in electronic and auto parts factories in the country, but Vietnamese workers quickly gave them a reality check. In September 2022, just 3 months after opening, BYD's new factory in Vietnam faced a massive strike, with over 1,000 workers walking off the job, dealing a major blow to the company. Workers demanded changes in several areas. 1. The factory failed to provide night shift allowances as required by law. Night shift pay should be 130% of daytime pay. 2. Meal subsidies were too low, only 1.1 million dong per month, which wasn't enough for 2 meals a day at the factory. 3. The base salary was only 4.2 million dong, while other companies in the industrial park paid at least 4.4 million dong. 4. If workers only did 1 hour of overtime instead of 2, their performance bonus was deducted. 5. Dormitory conditions were poor and cafeteria food was subpar. 6. Female employees were not allowed to take breaks during menstruation. 7. No break times were scheduled between shifts. Under strong intervention from the local labor union, BYD Vietnam responded within 2 days. 1. From September the 1st, the base salary increased from 4.2 million to 4.8 million dong. 2. Night shift pay was adjusted. 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. increased to 130%, 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. to 200%, and 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. to 150%. 3. Female employees were granted 30-minute breaks during menstruation, and break times were introduced between shifts. 4. Cafeteria food quality was improved, restrooms were upgraded, and workers were provided with adequate toilet paper. By comparison, BYD's practices in China are far less generous. Factory shifts typically run 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Night shift allowances are only 2 yuan per hour, far below the 130% standard applied in Vietnam. For Chinese workers, the idea of striking for shorter overtime, menstrual leave, or better meals seems like a fantasy, something they wouldn't even dare to imagine. But in Vietnam, workers' demands were met. BYD tried to implement the same labor policies in Vietnam as in China, but Vietnamese workers pushed back. This proves that not every country's workforce can be treated like China's, where workers endure harsh conditions without complaint. Meanwhile, in 2024, BYD's factory in China saw a strike that left many stunned, not because workers were demanding better wages or rest, but because they were demanding more overtime. In mid-May, BYD's Wuxi Electronics factory suddenly announced that all IDL employees, workshop managers, and technicians would switch to a 5-day, 8-hour work schedule. Previously, they had worked 12-hour shifts with just 1 day off per week. After the change, their wages were cut nearly in half, so they went on strike demanding overtime be reinstated. Some might think these workers are crazy, not asking for a raise, but asking for long hours instead. But it's not entirely their fault. Most migrant workers take these jobs to support their families. Under BYD's pay structure, if they worked 5 8-hour days a week, their monthly salary would only be 2,490 yuan, barely enough to survive, let alone support a family. They had no choice but to demand overtime. It wasn't a choice, but a necessity. The strike sparked heated discussions online. One netizen commented, "This completely exposes the wage levels in most Chinese factories. Workers are literally working themselves to death. These pay structures force people to voluntarily take overtime, to accept working longer hours. I've seen workers stand for 16 hours a day for 4 straight months without a single day off." Another remarked, "Everywhere else in the world, workers go on strike to demand fewer hours, less overtime, and higher wages. Only in China do workers strike to demand more hours so they can earn enough to survive. That's truly unique to China." Someone else pointed out, "This is a result of cutthroat competition. Someone else is willing to work 9. In the end, everyone is forced to work 12. In a society that looks down on the poor and blames poverty on a lack of effort, no one can escape this cycle." The demands of BYD striking employees highlight the struggles and helplessness of China's workforce. But this isn't just happening at BYD, it's the reality in most Chinese factories. Another major automaker, Geely, has also been in the spotlight recently. A Geely employee posted online, "Geely in the south, Great Wall in the north. Both are notorious for overworking their employees. To meet sales targets, workers are squeezed for overtime. When projects are urgent, there are weeks with no days off. Working past 10 p.m. is normal, and night shifts run nonstop all year." One person asked, "With such intense deadlines, can the quality of these cars really be good? Would you dare to drive a car made by exhausted, overworked employees?" Another said, "These low human rights companies exploit workers to the bone. No wonder the US slaps tariffs on them. It's justified. If they don't even treat their own workers as human, how do they expect to compete with the West through industrialization? They're dreaming." A recent labor dispute in China has also been widely discussed online. In January, an employee at Huizhou Defy battery factory posted a video exposing the harsh conditions and illegal punishments at the company's so-called sweatshop.
This is the Huizhou Defy battery factory. It's 6:41 a.m. right now. I've been working since 8:30 p.m. on January 22nd, and I just finished my shift at 6:30 a.m. But get this, my team leader told me that if I clock out after 8 hours, it counts as absenteeism, and they'll deduct 3 days' wages from me. Take a look. The factory lights are still on. It's Sunday, but we're all working overtime. They don't even record Sunday shifts, just to make the numbers look clean on paper. Look at the production lines. Workers are still there. The second, third, and fourth floors are all packed. Every single line is still running. Temporary workers like us don't even get overtime pay. Factory management has probably made a deal with full-time employees to cover this up. But the reality is clear. Just like most factories, Huizhou Desai finds ways to bypass labor laws. It's disgusting. Look at the slogans on the wall: diligence, integrity, cooperation, innovation. They don't even live up to integrity. When labor inspectors come, they claim it's an 8-hour workday with Sundays off. But in reality, it's just more exploitation and oppression.
According to a follow-up video from the worker, his team leader asked him to stay for an extra 2 hours of overtime after his shift. He refused, wanting to go home and rest. The team leader warned that if he didn't work the extra 2 hours, it would be treated as an absenteeism. Not only would he lose that day's wages, but he would also be docked 3 additional days' pay, essentially working 4 days for nothing. The worker, unwilling to stay, clocked out and left. To his surprise, management actually followed through with the penalty and deducted 3 days' wages. Unhappy with the decision, he recorded a video at the factory and uploaded it to Douyin. The video quickly resonated with workers across China, especially the line, "Clocking out after an 8-hour shift counts as absenteeism," which blatantly violated labor laws. Outraged social media users began sharing the video in support, and it soon went viral. Shortly after, the worker received a phone call from someone who asked him a series of questions before subtly pressuring him to delete the video. When he refused, the caller escalated the threat, saying they had his and his family's personal information and would expose it if the video was not taken down. Instead of backing down, the worker doubled down. He publicly posted his own name and his information on Douyin, openly challenging those trying to intimidate him. His defiant stand gained widespread support online. Many social media users defended him, stating that he had simply documented the injustice he faced. What was wrong with that? One person commented, "We have to win this fight. Remember, a single finger breaks easily, but a clenched fist is strong. Stand together and fight back." Another voiced their solidarity. "I am willing to speak up for workers' rights. This isn't just about you. There are many Chinese people behind you who will support you. Stay strong." Others called for institutional support, with one user saying, "I really hope some organizations can step in and help migrant workers like us when we face these issues." To prevent the video from being removed, many Douyin users reposted it on their own accounts, and it was also shared on platforms like Bilibili and RedNote. Although the incident happened in January, it has only recently begun to gain traction. A search on social media now brings up numerous clips from the original video. Social media users are determined to push the case onto trending lists to attract attention from relevant authorities. Since Desai Battery is an Apple supplier, some users tagged Apple in their posts, urging the company to intervene and help the worker defend his rights. Others called for mass complaints for Apple's customer service online. Some even remarked that in China, seeking justice often means turning to the US, a reality that may have long come to accept. This labor rights struggle in China stands in stark contrast to the strikes in Vietnam. In Vietnam, thousands of workers unite with massive demonstrations backed by strong labor unions, making it impossible for factories to ignore their demands. Meanwhile, in China, a lone individual dares to speak out but can only rely on Douyin to voice his grievances. Fortunately, the internet has allowed some awakened users to rally in support, ensuring he does not fight alone. As for labor unions, that is out of the question. Under such conditions, the chances of workers successfully defending their rights in China are close to zero. One key reason Vietnamese workers are able to stand their ground is the shift of manufacturing from China to Vietnam, largely due to the Trump administration's repeated tariff hikes on Chinese goods. Many Chinese companies moved their factories to Vietnam, leading to labor shortages as demand for workers surged. A Chinese user in Vietnam noted that local shoe factories are overwhelmed with orders this year, and with business booming, labor shortages have given workers leverage. When facing a strike, factory owners have no choice but to comply. In such a labor market, Chinese employers attempting to use the same exploitative tactics they do in China quickly find that it simply doesn't work.